Hello, my name is Bill Penczak, and welcome to this edition of Transformation Talks. I am the Chief Transformation Officer for the Center for Accounting Transformation, and in these talks, we interview folks who are part of the CPA industry, the accounting industry, who are experiencing or in the throes of some sort of transformation. As we all know, the industry has been changing a lot in the past 5 or 10 years through either technology advancements or just the mindset of people looking for a better way. And today we're lucky to have Chase Birky with us today. He is the founder of an organization called Dark Horse. I'll let him tell the story about that a little bit. And I think it's a really good example of a path forward for those professionals in the industry who want to do things in a different way. Chase is one of the early adopters of all that. Why don't you tell us about the origin story and how you get started in this, and we'll go from there.
Sounds good. Well, appreciate have the opportunity to speak with you, Bill. This is something I've been looking forward to here. So, essentially, I started my career like many CPAs in the Big Four. I started in audit specifically, not really having a great idea of what audit truly was, because you take the courses in your undergrad and, you have a section of it on the CPA exam, but what that material is versus what the job is, are two very different things. But I graduated college at a time where you just had to get a job, right? Because I had friends that graduated the year before me that were trying to get, jobs at Chili's, or just anywhere they could earn a paycheck so they didn't have to move back in with their parents. And we're struggling even at that. So, getting a job offer my senior year, I was like, great, let's do it. And so pretty quickly into my tenure at Deloitte, I just realized, audit as a discipline was not really resonating with me. It wasn't really something that I felt like my interests and my skill set aligned well with. And then being with a big international firm, it was kind of its own thing, and it's great for certain folks. For me, it just was like, kind of on multiple levels. I knew this was not going to be, the balance of my career. So very quickly, into that experience, realize, okay, let's think about what the next steps are, get my 2 years, get my license, and then be ready for the next step. Because I didn't want to get stuck. And so I had a chance encounter with someone I knew from college who was starting up a firm that was going to be focused on tax services and client accounting services, even though probably wasn't called that at the time, and that was really more where my interest was. And so, the idea of being able to do that in an entrepreneurial way really, seemed exciting to me. So, conversations over the next year prior to my departure, and ultimately went into partnership with that gentleman. And like a lot of partnerships out there, they don't always work out. And, those that, don't dissolve, a lot of them, I would say, probably leave a lot on the table as to what they could be, if the partners were more aligned from, a core value standpoint, as well as a strategic standpoint and all that, but a lot of them just exist until, they get to a breaking point. So, over the course of a couple of years, learned a lot, in the tax field, because that was new to me, at least from a practice standpoint, at that point. So I was really just absorbing myself in as much as I possibly could on the tax side, and trying to translate my audit skills into actually being able to be on the preparation side, because, it's one thing to critique a dish of food at a restaurant. It's another thing to prepare it. And you don't always appreciate that until you're on the actual preparation side. So come about 2015, the irreconcilable differences that, just became too apparent to ignore any longer, got me just to leave without really a set plan of what I was going to do. And at that point, all I was really concerned about is, servicing a small book of clients and, just paying bills and, kind of just seeing where things went. I'd like to say that I had the vision for Dark Horse and what it would become at that point, but that was a few years down the road before that would really formulate into something that was, more representative of what it is today. So anyways, in that process, I really, discovered that I had some abilities I didn't think I had in terms of being able to bring in business, service it, kind of run all facets of the business, so that was really transformational for me, probably more personally than even professionally, just realizing, my potential and also realizing I could be the author of my own story, and I could, chart a path through life that wasn't subject to, the control or opinions of others. So
Do you think that quality is rare in public accounting, the ability to come to that conclusion, because you did that pretty quickly in your career, that you did have the capacity and the ability to develop business, start a company, do the work and manage people and all that? Do you think that's a rare trait in public accounting?
It's something that I had to discover in myself because, in undergrad studies, the entrepreneurship courses honestly scared me. I was like, I don't know anything about marketing, advertising, any of these other disciplines. Like, I'm an accountant or an accountant in training, right? And so I didn't even recognize that I had any of those proclivities in myself, so when it comes to the profession as a whole, I really think it's a matter of comfort, because if you have a certain level of comfort, you're going to be less likely to make a huge jump, whether that comfort is in, something you could depend on, in terms of work, salary, whatever. It's just, I think a lot of accountants are creatures of habit. So if they're comfortable, they're less likely to make those moves because, they know what's at stake if it doesn't work out. And paralysis by analysis, I think, is something we're all plagued with as accountants.
Well, and then the other dynamic I think that plays out in firms, especially big firms, is that you're so focused on your deliverables and your billable hours and all of that you don't have time to breathe and think about things and like, what else could there be? And if you're at a big firm like a Deloitte, like you were at, everything is very prescriptive of what you're going to do. And you're going to spend X amount of time doing Y. And then you may get to a certain level and have the opportunity to go do something else, but it's very measured. And with a big organization, it has to be that way. I think in the more dynamic firms, smaller firms, they have the ability to be more nimble, but maybe not the experience to be able to do that. And so people stay in their lanes, and I think you're right. There is a certain risk aversion to the type of people that go into public accounting. So I think you're somewhat of a unicorn in a good way.
Yeah, and like I said, I don't know if I'd be on the path that I'm currently on unless I wasn't in situations that I was trying to actively escape. Not to say that it was totally terrible. It just was not good for me, right? In both environments, and so I think necessity is, I think there's a saying out there that necessity is the, kind of seed of all productivity, or it's something along those lines. And that rang true for me, and it really, pushed my back up against the wall. Is like, okay, I've got to perform, in order to pay these bills and, not foreclose on a mortgage and all that. It's like, when you're put in that situation, you're forced to discover things about yourself that, just might not come to the surface otherwise.
Awful grown-up stuff, right?
Yes. And I was also fortunate, to, not have some of the encumbrances that a lot of folks have, with young families and those sorts of things, where it's like, it's not just about you or your spouse if you're married, but it's about the family, because that's another thing too. That's like, someone who's at a senior manager level at a traditional firm, while they might have those entrepreneurial, aspirations and want to go start up their own firm, it's kind of like, okay, well, how much time, energy, and money, am I going to be putting into this at the expense of my family, chasing this dream? And, I really think that gets in the way of a lot of folks, and
Yeah.
really something we, solve for in our accelerator program to make it so there is a way to do that, where you're not putting everything on the line.
So the traditional path could have been for you, back against the wall, I'm just going to go out, hang a shingle, or worse yet, maybe just join another firm and go do something like in a normal course. So what was the pivot point that said, maybe there's a different way to skin this cat?
Yeah. So probably end of 2018, getting into close to the 3-year mark of, what was originally a sole proprietorship that had become Dark Horse at that point. I started to realize that, I was spending a lot of time and energy and breaking my back to build a practice up to what it was at that point. And I knew I wasn't alone in that regard. I see a lot of conversations with folks and reading things online, that a lot of folks just struggle with that. It's one thing to get from 0 to 1. It's hard. And then going beyond that is probably even harder. And so the idea of, what could we do that would be just totally different and out of the box, that would allow folks, to do what I'm doing in a much easier way, in a much more sophisticated way, that would actually move the needle for them in a major way. Because you've got all these, small micro firms out there that are recreating a wheel that, has already been created in one form or another, amongst, tens of thousands of firms, but they're spending a lot of time and energy and effort building things that already exist. And a lot of times
it's really frightening if you look at the concentration of the firms. So you look at the IPA top 500, now 500 firms, and the 500th firm is comparatively to other industries is pretty small, right? And then beyond that, you've got, like you say, all those micro firms that there are tens of thousands of them. And, I would suggest that they're all reinventing the same wheel every day and facing the same stuff every day. And they're maybe not levering technology the way that they should, and have no succession planning and all that. So the market, what I love about the industry is I get to work with really smart people. And what is frustrating, though, I think a lot of times, and people have told me this, people within firms, is that getting so stuck in doing things the same way is just going to be a stranglehold. And over time, younger people, more progressive people are going to start thinking, is that all there is, or is there another way of doing things? So kind of fast forward, let's talk about the Dark Horse model, if you will, and how that works right now. And then we're going to maybe unpack some of those attributes.
Yeah, definitely. So really where we started was with what we call our accelerator program. And that was designed so that folks at the senior manager level at a traditional firm could, build a 6-figure book from scratch in a couple of months. So what that involves is us paying them a salary, so that they can pay their bills while they're building. We're training them on all of our technology, our sales process, equipping them for success, in those first 2 weeks. And then we have really a marketing engine, if you will, that is creating inbound inquiries to our website, phone calls, a couple other avenues. And so, once they've been trained on kind of how our process works, then we have them field those inquiries, set up calls, create proposals, send out engagement letters, do the work, so on and so forth. So it's drinking out of the fire hose in a lot of ways, because you're kind of being exposed to all aspects of the business, and building a book very quickly. But it's designed to be about 6 to 12 months. So it's not, something you're going to be doing for years to get to a certain point. And so once they get to 150,000 in recurring revenue, they've got the ability to be a principal of the firm. At which point there's a buy-in, and they get some shares and all of that. So, on the accelerator side, really what we've said is, okay, a lot of what people are spending their time on is, building the website, building a brand, trying to get some nucleus of clients in whatever way they can figure out, trying to figure out which pieces of technology are going to support them, and it's like you end up throwing all this stuff against the wall, and then you realize, okay, some of this works, but a lot of it needs to be reconstructed, but it's really difficult to have that level of foresight, until you have a scale where it's like, this clearly doesn't work, or you understand your processes or define them such that you realize, well, this piece of technology actually isn't the right one because it doesn't solve for X, Y, or Z, or there's overlap or whatever there is, And you mentioned, Bill, too, about, kind of the momentum, that can keep someone in a job where ultimately it might not be where they want to be, but they're so busy and they've got so many demands of their time and so much stress that it's like, okay, I'll think about this after, April 15th or October 15th or whatever it is. Then they get to that point and then they're like, I need a vacation. And then they're really just trying to spend their time recuperating. And then before they know it, they're back into, the ramp up for the next busy season. And it's, this cycle of, okay, the things that could, in that case, get them into a different, career opportunity, or in the case of a firm owner, to be able to transform their processes and avoid a lot of, the seeds of that burnout, that got them to that point. Just, they don't get the attention and the thought that, is needed for it because they're just trying to survive in a lot of ways.
And I think that holds true for a lot of different things, even like on the firm level, talking about long-term strategies. So for the firms that are interested in transforming themselves and think about, okay, where do we want to be in 2 years or 3 years from now? And then what do we need to do in the next 12 to 18 months to make that start happening? And, I would argue like now-ish, this time of the year, this is towards the end of August, is probably the way and the time to start thinking about that. But then you got people on vacation, and then you got tax deadlines coming up next month, and I've heard tax folks kid about their clients that say, this one client, closely held business, wants to figure out their exit plan, and they're always on a 3-year plan, and they've been on a 3-year plan for the past 10 years. Like, oh, yeah, we're going to do it someday, and then it never quite happens. So I think it's being purposeful about it. But what I like about your model is that I'm over exaggerating and way simplifying it, but it's like a plug and play. The issues that that firms face, whether it's from a technology standpoint, from a process standpoint, or all of the back office type things like marketing and BD and managing referral sources and all that, you don't have to recreate the wheel. And if it's out of your league to begin with, it makes it even more daunting. And if you can plug and play, if you will, that makes it so much better. I'm going to read something that I really found interesting off of your website, that I think captures what we're talking about so perfectly. And we'll put the link to this in the final version of this video. But the brand, this is part of your brand story, and it says, what hasn't been disrupted in the century-old accounting firm partnership model. The model. A few head honchos at the top call the shots and hold the staff hostage during tax season. We felt that it was high time for the power to be given back to the people. So we created a business model to crush the conventional power structures that profit from the blood, sweat, and tears of those who actually do the work. So that was a little bit of workers of the world unite. I get that. But it really does capture a lot of the sidebar conversations that I've heard from up and coming people about, why am I busting my tail for all of this? And I'm not really learning anything. And there's others that are profiting from it. And, eventually the smart people who stick with it may get on the partner track and may get that brass ring. But this sounds like your model is a way for them to fast track that if they've got the moxie to be able to pull it off.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, some people would take issue with this, but I think that in a lot of ways, a traditional partnership model resembles a pyramid scheme where, all of the folks that are actually doing the work, earning money, that money's flowing up, to the top. And only 2% of, people who enter public accounting make partners. So, in a lot of ways, it has the structure, of that pyramid, and that has been able to exist for as long as it has, because the value proposition is, whatever years of experience you get at this firm is going to set you up for the next thing, which is probably not going to be within the firm, right? And so people have been willing to trade their time, to have that jumping off point, into whatever else they're going to do next. But as everyone knows at this point, that pipeline of talent is turning that paradigm on its head. And, the idea that there's going to always be this fresh crop of, undergrads that are, high capacity, high intelligence, and will grind it out for some period of time, just doesn't exist to the extent that it did. And it's questionable what that's going to look like over the next 5, 10, 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, more kids are going into finance than into accounting. And I've written about this before, the term, you get smart people doing stupid work. Right?
Yes.
You get smart. I mean, it's become, I took a couple of accounting classes in college, wasn't my major, and I know how hard it is. And you get really smart people who do well at it. And then the smartest people get their CPAs, and then you get them. So you hire them out of some great school, and you put them and have them go do, cash reconciliation, some mindless stuff. And they're probably thinking, what have I gotten myself into? And so, yeah, there's a certain amount of that has to come with everybody in every situation. But things like technology that can take some of the drudgery out of that, and so talk about what you're doing, kind of unpack it a little bit about some of the technologies that you all have put in place that help facilitate doing things smarter.
Right. So taking a step back, just to kind of touch on some of the points you brought up, I think a lot of, kind of the systemic issues in public accounting are just related to alignment, people being aligned in incentives and the why and what we're here to do. When there's not alignment in a meaningful way, you're just going to have short-term relationships, and I think a big part of that alignment previously was folks knowing, okay, they're going to be providing, the guidance and the training and the work that's going to allow me to make that next step. Right. So now that is less of the equation, the alignment issues, I think, are a lot more in focus. The other thing too is that, your average partnership, you've got partners that are doing client service, right? So when you're doing client service, you are trading that time for what you could be doing to build your firm, to develop your people, to develop your technology. It's something that I think has been a expectation that partners will have some percentage of their time allocated to client service. What's different about Dark Horse is that, our leadership team, primarily, and in my case, entirely spends my time, building the firm, building the infrastructure, developing the people. I don't do any client service. And that's intentional because, when you're in that part of the business, yes, there's great learnings and things that, allow for strategic decisions to be based in reality. But a lot of times what ends up happening is your time gets stolen from that. And then these bigger strategic initiatives and things that could really move the firm forward, as you mentioned, just later often ends up being never, because they aren't able to fully allocate, the time and resources to make those things happen. So for us, just because I have the time doesn't mean I'm capable or qualified of developing technology, right? That's not what I was trained to do. It's, something I have some proclivities in, just, out of an interest standpoint. But we recognized once we got to a certain point that we needed, a VP of technology that would really own that part of the business, and someone who comes from, a software engineering and database management standpoint, someone who just understands that part of the business in a way that we could never understand. So really for us, our technology journey has been about, we started with a bunch of ad hoc stuff that worked to some extent and didn't work maybe to a larger extent. And then, the light bulb moment for us was, okay, we can't just be chasing, the sexiest technology out there. We've got to really get clear on what our workflow process looks like, how, this works from end to end, or at least how it currently works, how we want it to work, and then build a technology stack around that. Because if you're just putting technology out there and trying to, figure out a way to maneuver into utilizing it, a lot of times adoption's low and it just crashes, right?
Yeah.
So, for us, it was really about, okay, let's map all of our processes between tax, CAS, and all of the underlying projects underneath that. And how is, our technology currently supporting that? How is data flowing from app to app? Could that be automated? Is this app the right app for this part of the process? And really just getting strategic about, architecting our technology and not just, throwing stuff up against the wall. So, that level of focus is just, you can only do at a certain scale, because if you're just, a couple person firm, you don't have the money in a lot of cases to hire the right people to be able to do those sorts of things. So, it's something we can do at scale because we've got the ability.
Because you've got scale.
Yeah.
Whereas a single shingle does not have scale.
Right. And for us, kind of the paradigm that we operate under, which is kind of a 180 from everyone else, is our client as a firm, or at least as a leadership team, is our CPA. We're here to serve them. They're here to serve clients. So if we can support them, client service is going to happen organically because they are resourced the correct way to start with. Whereas your traditional model is multiple layers of management to review work and to identify deficiencies. We're trying to eliminate those deficiencies to start with a better platform.
So, I've heard firms talk about, we want to use technology so we can free up our people to do higher value work for our client. And I wish I had a nickel for every time I heard that, because I think it's great in theory, but awful in practice. And so how have you been able to train your CPAs that are part of the group to figure that out? So rather than just doing what I consider like the transactional piece of it, of I'm going to do a return for you, I'm going to do your CAS report every month, and how do you teach, inspire those, we were talking about before, kind of the typical CPA personality, that to be more consultative? Because I haven't seen very many firms do a great job of that. Right. On the compliance side, not on the consulting side per se, but on the compliance side.
Yeah. So, I think this kind of goes back to, some of the themes we were talking about earlier. In order to actually provide advisory level services, you have to free yourself up from the blocking and tackling, right? Because the more that you're in the weeds, the less likely you're going to be to, be above the trees, right? Because switching those hats, the context switching that requires, most humans just aren't set up to, seamlessly transition between both mindsets. So, for us, it's a matter of, okay, this technology is going to be largely focused on compliance, not on AI, machine learning and stuff to help you on the advisory side, because a lot of that still rests on the human, for being able to identify, strategies and, building the rapport to actually be able to execute on those strategies and drive results, so our technology, is more about, let's free your time and your brain up to be able to focus on those things. And as time goes on, we're going to have more technology that leverages, the strategy and the advisory side of things, but I think a lot of the technology that's out there right now is, an oversell, under deliver sort of deal. It'll be advertised to do X, but really what it does is a lot less than that.
Like some of the platforms I've seen on the CAS side, where, the the promise is we'll do a management report for you every month. We'll take the information that comes out of QuickBooks and do a report. It's like a standard report, and it's like your name here. And
right. And it depends on good data anyways. I mean, if you don't have really good data to be able to parse it into a management report, I mean, what are we doing here?
So there's the old adage about there's a big difference between information and insight. And that insight part is like, so what do I do with it? And how does this make my life better? And that's hard. And again, if you grow up in the weeds, it is hard to get that treetop view.
Right. And so, from our standpoint, we are a human-centric brand in terms of, what we're putting out to clients, because clients don't really, for the most part, care about the technology that goes into the work product. They just care about the timeliness, the quality, and how it's moving the needle for them, and that at this point in time, that real value driver comes from humans that are leveraging technology to support them. It doesn't come straight from technology. Right. And so for us, we're growing into a technology company as time goes on, but that's not something that is an external, focus in terms of clients utilizing technology outside of basic, cloud computing things we need for collaboration. It's really about, the technology to support your CPA so that they can provide you with a higher level of service at a competitive price.
So what's your big, hairy, audacious goal for Dark Horse?
My BHAG is to go public. We want to do that in the next 5 to 10 years. We're in an infancy stage in a certain way. I mean, the firm's been around for 7 years now, but we didn't pivot this firm into what the business currently is until about 3 years ago. We went from a staff of about 4 people to 65 now, and it's one of those things where we've clearly identified a product market fit that, is showing itself in the numbers. And from my standpoint, the more important thing is that, Dark Horse exists to really disrupt public accounting in a positive way, and change people's lives, our CPAs and our clients' lives for the better. And if we only do that for a small group of people, how does that really move the needle, in the more macro picture? And so for us, it's about, because we truly believe in what we're doing, we want to scale it to scale our impact, and, whenever we add a CPA, merge in a practice, we're adding levels of experience and expertise that really benefits everyone, because one of the big things about being a Dark Horse CPA is that you're not alone, right? We've got a really collaborative environment where people are actively helping their peers get through client questions and situations, and just all the myriad of just one-off things that one person couldn't possibly know even half of, but the more folks we have that have the right mindset of contributing first, consuming second, there's just so much knowledge and up-leveling that happens that, really allows people to continue to grow in their practice.
So in amongst the smaller firms, the number 200 all the way down, the blend of service lines is primarily tax, some audit, and then CAS continues to be the fastest growing new service line. Have you given any thought about adding audit services as part of the mix, or is the risk piece of it and the complexity of it just too much?
I'm smiling, if not chuckling a little bit to myself with that question. Because of my background in audit, it's something
you can't help yourself.
Yeah. Well, maybe just the opposite. I really, that's not an area, a service line we want to get into. Sure, the insurance is a lot, and it's a lot of work to make sure that it's done right and the quality's there, and you going through all the peer review processes and all of that. But more than anything, it's about how do we add value to a client's personal or business financial situation, and audit is a need for a number of businesses out there. But for me, it's just about how does that drive value? And we just only want to be partnering with clients to drive value. We also don't want to have the complications of conflicts of interest. Going public, we're not going to do that with an audit practice.
Right.
There's a number of strategic reasons why that's just
and I think the business reason is, or my view is, if you look at I did a piece of research for a client, a medium-sized CPA firm, and we were benchmarking them against a peer group. And if you look at the margin, overall operating margin of the firms that were predominantly or exclusively tax and CAS, the margin was, dozens of points, if not 20% points above what it was for the audit. There's an old fight that I've heard before, not a fist fight, but the audit people arguing with the tax people, and the tax people say, or the audit people say, why are we messing with all of these little $1,500 1040 and 1065 returns? It's like, why are we wasting all our time? My clients are $50,000, $60,000 engagements. And the tax person said, this is kind of a composite story, but the tax person said, well, what's your, how much write-off do you have on your $50,000 engagement? It's like, look into their beer. It's like, I don't know, 10, 12 grand. And like, okay, what's your margin on that? And then that usually shuts down the audit people pretty quickly, because the margin, because there's a lot more moving parts, and the scheduling piece of it is a pain in the neck and all that. That's where they lose their shirt. So from a business standpoint, the overall contribution margin is a heck of a lot better on the tax side, and even more so on the CAS side, as you well know, than on the audit side. So right. It's I think that's a good business model. And I was just curious more than anything. I wasn't trying to suggest your business model, but anyway, that made,
and the other thing too is that, you got to look at kind of your clientele, kind of your ideal client that, you're trying to attract. And, we originally named ourselves Dark Horse CPA because our client was the Dark Horse small business, that was, competing against their larger, more known competitors. So there's not the biggest need for audit services at companies at that level, and while we certainly will be moving up market as time goes on, it's one of those things where it's really just about, what are we here to do, as opposed to being, the Costco or the Amazon of the world and sell everything. It's kind of like, well, let's just be more the in and out and, just be really good at what we do, and provide a ton of value, because ultimately that's what's going to drive growth.
Yeah. No, knowing what your value statement is, staying in your lane and doing it really, really well, rather than trying to be all things to all people. And, the middle market or the lower middle market is a great place to be. I mean, if you look at the wealth of individuals in the United States, a lot of it resides in that those locally owned or closely held businesses. So it's like, that's never going to go away. And, everyone's beating their heads against the wall, bigger firms and the mid-sized firms, about going after public companies or whatever else, or even the big companies. But there's a whole lot of the smaller companies need the help that I think that you're trying to train your people to be able to provide.
Absolutely.
I think that's probably more rewarding for the right kind of people, rather than I'm just going to do a return and, hope put them on their way on the 17th or 16th of April.
Right. I mean, 100%. It's really about being able to see the fruits of your labor, and the larger the organization is, the less you're going to see that, right? Because you're going to be dealing with someone who doesn't have ownership over the business or any meaningful desire, beyond just, maybe their performance bonuses or whatever. It's when you're dealing with a small business owner and you're tangibly helping them, there's just a lot more fulfillment in that sort of work.
It's because why? Because it's real money.
Yes.
Because it's somebody's real money. It's not just a corporation's real money. And there's that is a more fun space, challenging space to work in, because you can be accretive to whatever they're trying to do in the most cases, if you're doing it right.
And the other thing too is it's just a chronically underserved market. There's just a bunch of one-off shops, that'll service those businesses to some extent, a lot of bad service that we've, seen and, kind of inherited via some of our clients. And then the bigger firms that just don't have a service model that's set up to really serve them. The fees are too high, the attention is too low because it's going towards their, higher paying clients. So it's a chronically underserved market. So it's even that much more rewarding because, what else is out there, a lot of it is not great, so we're able to really just, provide a level of value that, goes beyond expectations.
I mean, the average net promoter score, if y'all are familiar with that concept for companies like an Amazon or a Google or a Starbucks, is like in the 70s. The average net promoter score for banks and for cable companies, which people love to hate, they're like in the low 20s. And the average a couple of years ago for CPA firms was like 24. Yep. And so the service level has a lot to be desired. The data kind of shows. And then also going back to those smaller firms, it's also a demographic issue, I think, because you've got older people in their 60s or late 50s or whatever, wanting to smell in the barn and wanting to get out of Dodge and have no succession plan. One of my firm clients bought a 3-partner firm a couple of years ago, and I was talking to them afterwards, and a couple of years after, I said, "What would you have done had you not sold to this other firm?" "Oh, probably just shut it down." And so, like, all the clients would have gone kaput, and so there's a whole demography shift of what's happening at the younger end of having the few people are coming in maybe are thinking differently, and at the other end of the spectrum, the baby boomers are trying to get out of Dodge and don't know quite how to do it. So I think demography is working in your favor. So what as we wrap up here, what are some of the words of advice, way up, about transformation for maybe that individual? So rather than a firm, I think your journey and the value proposition is really for that right-minded professional that wants to do things a little bit differently. What are some pieces of advice you would give to them about how to start asking the right questions about what they want to be when they grow up?
Yeah. So an exercise that I did maybe 2 years ago, which I thought was super powerful, is to write your obituary. And I know that sounds morbid, but writing your obituary.
I just had a birthday a couple of weeks ago, and I rewrote mine. So that's funny. I just got goosebumps because I've done that.
Yeah, I mean, it's powerful, right? You're writing what you want to be said about your life story, your impact on the world, and those you love. And when you start with that end in mind, then you get a lot of clarity in terms of what needs to happen to make that be a true, statement about your life. And so it's kind of that idea of starting with the end in mind. And when you do that, I think a lot of things are going to gain clarity in terms of, why something doesn't work for you and isn't supporting that vision, and what needs to happen next in order to, start to build that, because I think a lot of people, if they wrote their obituary as it would stand, if they died today, they wouldn't really love what they had to write, but if you can write something that's aspirational, that you can grow into, that, to me, that just provides a ton of clarity on kind of what's next.
Well, I wrote mine like 10 years ago, and I said I revisited it, and at the time when I wrote it, we were still living in Houston, and in my obituary I said he died on the Olympic Peninsula of Washington State, and that's where I live right now. So that's at least one of the boxes I got to check. But it freaks people out. Like, you did that. I've also figured out which music I want to play at my funeral.
What's on the top of that list?
So Just Breathe by either the Willie Nelson version or the Pearl Jam version. And then the crescendo, and then there's a George Harrison song, All Things Must Pass. And then the last one at the very end is You Can't Always Get What You Want by the Rolling Stones. But at the end, where the choir comes in on the real version, I'm going to have a real choir sing the last part of it.
Nice. Yeah. I love it.
And I've shared that with my wife, and it's in the file, and she'll probably do it. So, and again, people think that's freaky, and like, why would you want to do that? It's like, because, what's the end in mind? And being purposeful, it starts right now, and you got to get to that step by step.
Right. If you don't have a destination targeted, you're not going to like the destination you end up at.
Or to quote George Harrison, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. And that is that from the Dark Horse album? Maybe put a bone on that. Maybe from the Dark Horse album from George Harrison.
Could be, yeah.
Could be. It's your new theme song. There you go.
Yeah.
Well, this has been great. I really appreciate your time, Chase. We'll put your website in the on the final version of this. I'll put a link to that quote about from your brand story. I think that was great. And again, great insights. I love your energy. I love the idea that you have. And give the best of luck to you in the future.
Awesome. Really appreciate it, Bill. Great conversation.
Okay. All right. Take care.
You too.